Hey everyone, here's the stereotypes for every killer in DBD. These stereotypes are mainly just common things I've noticed about each character, and so will be very subjective, so drop your own down below. Let's get into it. Trapper. Trappers are interesting as they come in quite a wide variety, I'd say, seeing as they're both the entry-level character but also one of the hardest in the game. There's the classic basement trapper who will do just about anything to get survivors into the basement, running a backpack build and stuff like that. There's the trappers who solely trap grass and suffer horribly on any map that doesn't have it. Then there's the truly good trappers who manage to actually catch you out with a sneaky trap out in the open, all of them having varying levels of skill. Regardless of the type of trapper you face, I find they pretty much always say GG, even if they just got railed for the last 10 minutes. They're players who can stomach any kind of pain. Wraith. Wraiths often come in three forms, I find. First off, we have the fairly normal, casual, chill Wraith players who run add-ons like Double Speed or Uncloak or something like that. They don't focus anyone too hard and generally try to play nice. Then we have the other two types. The first is the Silent Bell Wraith. These Wraith players are usually super brutal or just really want to jump scare you. The final Wraith type is the universal one we all know and love, the frosty eyes, laggy, tunneling camper Wraiths who repeatedly hit you on hook for bub existing. Billies are either super babies who are doing their first curve and will ultimately resort to M2s after learning that collision exists in the strangest of places, or there'll be some curve master who somehow bends space-time and hits you around a loop that doesn't even seem physically possible. There's rarely any in between. These billies are often dressed up in some crazy look too. Either they're hitting only the environment or only survivors, rarely in between. Nurse I find it's either a super noob who likely is playing the character for the very first time, and can either barely get a single hit, or progressively learns the ropes as the match goes on, and you see a monster get born in real time. The other kind of nurse is the player who just seems locked in from the start. They roll you the whole match with no chill, and either have full slowdown, or no perks at all. She's a character where there's little in between, and she has wild extremes. Myers, I'd have to say the stereotype around Myers is honestly that he's just pretty chill. I find Myers players tend to be fairly nice nowadays. I think especially now that they can't run any form of Tombstone, they've resided to just being chill players all round. The Myers rework wasn't that long ago though, so the data here is a bit sparse. Hag, I find the stereotypical hag is not too different than nurse. Hags I find are either super confused and clearly very new players who have no clue at all how to use the power. They'll spend the whole match randomly placing traps in the weirdest of spots, or hoarding them around the hook with little to no thought. The other kind are the ones who seem pretty competent, but also aware of how lacking their character is in power, so they'll make up for it by playing very brutally, and usually running something annoying like Franklin's Demise. And I guess the third type is the Chag players, who are just like an entirely different breed. Doctor. The most common stereotype for Doctor is the impossible skill check Doctor, who thinks he had a unique idea by running every kind of perk that messes with skill checks. It's all good though because, you know, we've all been there. And hey, it is fun to play as. Doctors in general seem to me to be fairly relaxed players though, despite the insanity of the character. I find I rarely get tunneled by Doctors, but I also find I rarely face a good Doctor. I think a bit like Wraith, it is a character often associated with newer players because of his simple seeming ability, but when you do find the truly good ones, it is very scary. Huntress. Huntress is similar to Trapper in that there's so many Huntress players of varying skill levels it's hard to pin down a coherent stereotype for a more universal one. I'll just list the ones I can think of. There are the ones who always hold their hatchets up around entire loops, ones who hit the craziest orbitals like it's nothing and have 7,000 hours in the game entirely in Huntress, and the ones who will repeatedly toss hatchets at you with there being a 50-50 chance if they land or not. Also, most of the were-elks seem to hate people with a passion. Bubbas are either the most toxic players you've ever encountered or the nicest people on Earth who will destroy you but do it respectfully. Nowadays the whole basement Bubba stereotype I'd say doesn't really exist, which is sorta sad, but obviously with anti-camp features and stuff like that, they're simply a dying breed. You do still get the occasional phase camping Bubba though, particularly during endgame. Freddy. I feel like Freddy has gone through so many phases that I don't even know how to pin him down. I just get the vibe though from almost all Freddys that they hate me for whatever reason. Freddys seem to often tunnel, camp, and hit on hook, but then rarely back it up with any actual skill. I think it must be all the reworks they've gone through and the grand total of 0 cosmetics they've received. They must be tired, and you know what? Fair enough. Pig. The stereotype for Pig for the longest time was obviously the whole boop the snoot, pigs are cute and harmless one, where everyone believed every and each pig was tameable with a simple point. This still holds relatively true, although it is harder to pull off nowadays. The other big stereotype is a bunch of pig players who seem to want to play the character incredibly lore accurately, by making it as hard as possible to remove your reverse bear trap, happily throwing the game if it means one head pop. Most pigs I find though are fairly straightforward players, but those are the outliers for sure. Clown. Clown can be a mixed bag, but none of them are particularly chill, I'd say. However, I feel this is just a product of their power being miserable to face for the most part. They're hard to like, but some of them do definitely try by running silly outfits like the elephant or chicken, and trying not to spam their bottles too much. There's also of course the PTB clown, which is just like, I don't know what to think of them. Some days it's kind of funny, other days it's a tired joke. Spirits always seem to be super locked in, even though they don't really need to be. It does seem like a lot of sweaty players play this character, and in some ways embody her, snapping from nice and happy to suddenly angry and vengeful, usually depending on how much they're rolling you. You can get the occasional fun or silly spirit though, who still likes to stand still mind game and will nod at you every time you outplay her. Legion. The majority of Legion players, I hate to say it, are just so mindless and miserable, running around and repeatedly deep wounding you with no thought for a grander plan, which means they usually end up losing too. They'll usually be kitted out in full biker or skull gear as well. On the flip side, you get those genuinely scary Legions who know how to use their power in chase and are a lot more thoughtful when in frenzy, taking advantage of your experience with all of the bad Legions. Then there's the Susie players, who seem to pretty much only play Legion for Susie and don't really care about what's happening in the match. Plague. Plague is another character where I think most Plagues are very aware that a large portion of the community just detests facing her, for the fact that healing builds are just entirely pointless. A lot of them play fairly ruthlessly for this reason I think, because lots of people equally act sort of toxic toward her. Plagues usually have a cool fit on though, and are never seen without thanatophobia. Ghostface. The most common stereotype for ghosty players is that they're memers, running the scary movie mask and teabagging and trying to go for Moris for screenshots. They don't care too much about how the game goes, they just want to mess around with you and maybe do a slug race and pretend they're repairing a generator. Then there's the subset of this kind of ghosty, which is their insecure cousin who thinks they're chill, but really they'll take offense to any kind of point or teabag and ruthlessly try to tunnel you out for memeing back in any way. Then finally there's the ghosty who just tries to play seriously, running a stealthy look and trying hard to win, even though the entire game and its design is working against them. Demogorgon. I'm not sure how to explain this, but it feels like when facing Demogorgons, you're actually just facing real dogs. They embody the character. Demos will nod the most enthusiastically, they'll repeatedly slam themselves into a wall despite knowing the collision, and they'll struggle but clearly be having a good time despite it, which is why everyone loves them. Oni. Oni players similarly embody their character well, as the typical Oni seems to play like the honor of their bloodline is actually on the line. Oni players are often extremely brutal, but then they often kind of have to be, especially against teams who like to pre-drop lots. They'll usually be dripped out in some fancy skin and greed every single pallet in existence, because they don't lose. Or so goes the motto. Deathslinger. Either they're happy to just be a cowboy and go around reeling people in and having some fun, or they'll be the most locked in ever, hitting you through the small gaps in shack, or through a space you didn't even know existed. Those are the worst ones. Usually whilst dressed as something bizarre like a fisherman. Slingers often care more about getting cool shots I find, rather than winning, and will go out of their way for them even if it means a throw. Pyramid Head. Pyramid Head players I think are mostly in it for the cool drip and aura, and also like to tunnel, but seemingly only because they enjoy the cool animation. Most Pyramid Heads always seem a bit overwhelmed with what's going on, but they're trying their best. Blight. Blight feels like a character with maybe the most stereotypes, with the most famous being the comp player who plays as optimally as possible with quad slowdowns, stretched res, filters, and hitting you with the slide A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, whatever tech on every loop. And if even a single gen pops, they go on a 30-minute rant about why survivors are overpowered. The other and more normal sort of Blight that I encounter are the super chill ones, but equally incredibly competent ones. The Blights who still make use of how strong the character is, but equally don't use everything to their advantage. They're just good at the game. Twins. I think twins often get stereotyped as sluggers, and to be honest, this is sadly quite true. Twins are so underplayed, and the few times I do face them, it is usually someone just running the super boring full-on slug playstyle. I think lots of their players are fine with this though, as this is almost a permanent reputation they'll always have. I have faith that out there though, there are twins players who go for cool victor leaps, and do interesting plays with both of the twins in conjunction. But equally I've seen a grand total of like 1 in the past 5 years, so, you know, here's to hoping. Trickster. Tricksters often don't seem to care about what's happening in the game and are largely more concerned with their fashion and wanting to show off their new outfit. They'd spend their time looking in the reflections of car windows if reflections existed in the game. They can also be very brutal though, and when they lock in on someone, they really dedicate themselves to catching them, all whilst dressed up in their little pink marshmallow outfit. Cute. On the other hand, the meaner players usually lock in, probably trying to show the Trickster up, you know? Nemesis. I think the stereotype for Nemesis more broadly is that the players are about as intelligent as he is, the joke being that they hear the notification sound and will simply run to it regardless of what it is, the big one being the unhook notification sound, so I suppose there's a level of lore accuracy in that too. There's something about the slow lumbering run of a Nemesis that just gives off this vibe, even if they're playing pretty well. The other Nemi stereotype is to do with zombies, which is either the Nemi loves the zombies and has cute names for them and speaks nicely to them, or the Nemi utterly despises them and will take every option to chastise them, or just brutally punch them in the face at any sort of inconvenience. I'm part of the second group. Pinhead. Pinheads are another tough stereotype to pin down as there's so few of them. I would say a common element between them all though is that they all seem to run Lethal Pursuer, hoping to find the box at the start of the game. It's like the one universal trick they have. Otherwise, I don't know if I have much of a clear stereotype about Pinhead players. They like the whole I came thing, probably. Artist. I have to say with Artist, I generally only ever encounter artists who seem fairly baffled about what the power does, often just spamming crows to fire out or trying to place them awkwardly around loops. It's very rare I find a good artist, or one in general, to be fair. It's another killer though that is usually dripped out in some cool artsy dress. Oh, and all of them run Severed Hands and Pain Res. Sadako. I think my visualization for the average Sadako in my head is maybe the lowest opinion I have for any killer. I find Sadakos are often the most boring and brutal type of killer to face, repeatedly teleporting, not engaging with you at all until they see the red circle around your icon. The stereotypical Sadako to me is just the most passive player ever, who thinks you can only use Condemned to win. But in fairness, this is also kinda true, and when I do face a hit and run Sadako, they usually get completely destroyed, so I know, it's a tough one. Dredge. Dredge is a tough one to stereotype as the character doesn't really have a face. I find it harder to project my feelings onto their players. I always get the vibe that Dredges are trying really hard though. Even though the character isn't that strong, they do their best to make it so, with strong builds, but ones that often don't really come into fruition. Horse Dredges are the most chill as well, and I won't explain that one anymore. Wesker. Weskers are either super lore accurate, insecure, and hate any time the survivors get a leg up on them, even if it was because of their own mistake. Or they're the most chill players ever who realize they'll often be tripped up by the game's strange collision, but will have a good time regardless. There's also a subset of Wesker mains who run only the Stars outfit, and they're either secretly or very openly in love with him. Knight. Knights are sadistic for the most part. They love pincering you and watching you suffer as you struggle to decide between getting hit by a guard or themselves. Many will simply watch on and wait for you to get hit by the guard, as if hitting you is beneath them. Their one good trick is always just an insta-spawn Carnifex, and they all seem to run hex perks for some reason, I found. Skull Merchant. Skull Merchant stereotypes are largely outdated as she's still often seen as the toxic 3-genning quad slowdown killer who will bring you to tears, and server closure. The modern Merchant I found is much more of a confused mess, who randomly tosses out drones and occasionally looks at their scanner as if they know what their power does. But they will be dripped out in one of the coolest outfits you've ever seen, so who's the real winner? Singularity. The average Singularity actually wants your genes, and will play like it, being the most brutally efficient players who love to stack pallet break builds and gen regression, all for the means of progress and to punish humanity. They'll also rig up all of their biopods to be perfectly out of reach from one another, while still having a minimum of 3 monitoring every generator at any given time, somehow. Good luck surviving the average Singularity. Xenomorph. I think the thing I've noticed about Xeno players is their united hatred of flame turrets. Whatever kind of Xeno player you face, no matter how sweaty, they'll always fidget around and do the crazy angry swing toward a flame turret when it breaks them out of crawler mode. They hate those things. Chucky. I feel Chuckies are often very lore accurate and character embodying, with them being as annoying as possible, creeping around and using any tactic there is to try and catch you. Chuckies generally have no chill, which is why I think it's also incredibly satisfying when you stun them and they fall flat on their back. I think it is that dynamic that makes this stereotype true. They realize they're just small little guys compared to the survivors, and so they have to prove they're big and scary by being mean. Unknown. The stereotype or general vibe I get when facing unknowns is that they're mostly in it for the vibe and the aura of the character. I don't think I've ever faced a particularly good unknown, to be honest though, but equally they do occasionally pull out the craziest shot out of nowhere, or appear behind you somehow. I feel unknowns in general are just in it for the love of the game and being a bit of a freak. Vecna. My favourite Vecna stereotypes are the ones who seem to take personal offense to you either getting the hand or eye of Vecna, and they will lore accurately tunnel you out of the game for obtaining them. Maybe this is an achievement thing though. Generally I find Vecna's to be pretty chill, honestly. There's lots of elements of his power that are ripe for funny interactions and moments, which I think is why I often find them quite fun and chill. Dracula. There's one definite subset of Draculas which are the ones obsessed with being a dog, who will just be permanently in dog mode all game, likely a wooing along with each hit. It's me, I'm the dog Dracula. The more common Dracula I find is usually fairly sweaty and channels the hatred for humanity into their gameplay, stacking anti-heal and being as mean as possible. There's also just the Alucard shield gamers who think fire is funny. Houndmaster. Houndmaster players are patient, I find, with them having to constantly deal with bugs throughout their time playing her. I do find Houndmasters are usually very good players as well, and are very competent with the power, but maybe this is also a product of people not really knowing how to face her. I find they often run anti-heal and not so much gen regression, unless it's Surge. Kaneki. Kaneki's stereotype is not too dissimilar from Blight's, I'd say, as he's quickly become known as the hyper-competitive character and is associated with being super sweaty, using the high mobility and speed to cut people off, constantly deep wounding, and in general just being a bit of a menace. I would say this is true for the majority I've encountered, but definitely isn't the only kind. The nicest ghoul players I find run the tortured ghoul skin, whereas the sweats I typically see in the default or Rise. Springtrap. I think 50% of Springtraps you encounter are just FNAF players coming over to play one of their favourite characters, and so often they're maybe not the most amazing, but you can tell they're having a good time and just vibing with the character. You also get the occasional person who tries really hard to utilise Springtrap's orbital ability with the axe drop-off, but I find this is pretty rare nowadays. There's also a Springtrap subset of people who only use the movie Afton skin and solely go for the white man jump scares. Krasue. I genuinely don't think I have enough data on this character to form any kind of stereotype about her. The only vibe I get is that they play pretty harshly, and know the character is strong, but hate it as well, so tend not to have too many hang-ups about being nice. Vecna. Also fairly new, so a bit tough to stereotype so soon, but I do find Vecnas often to be very brutal players, but also very spammy with divine attack, going for the more shots you take, the more you could possibly land type of attitude. I also find people who specifically use the Henry skin are usually a lot meaner, whereas the default Vecnas just seem a bit clueless. Alright, well that's gonna do it. Let me know what stereotypes you have for each of the killers too, down below. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.